And I'll go ahead and introduce our special speaker. Tani Zarelli is an internationally known expert on the state of Israel. Since she first made her first trip there, she was so touched by the state of Israel and the warmth of its people that she decided that she wanted to spread that message to all Americans. And she spearheaded several years ago an annual U.S. event called the Convergence Conference. And it features prominent U.S. and Israeli dignitaries and speakers. And in that way, she educates Americans about the need for a strong relationship between America and Israel. Tani also hosts groups of Americans on tours of Israel several times a year, hitting all the cultural, historical, and civic political stops. And she has, I noticed on her website, she now has all her dates for the early part of 2012. She actually just recently returned from 6 months over there. Tani has unique relationships with Israeli business people and has assisted American and Israeli business leaders in finding new business opportunities, which is so important, strengthening our economic ties. Tani believes that too few Americans really understand what's at stake in the Middle East, and one of her goals is to help them understand the Israeli-Arab conflict and how it relates to our American way of life. Her passion is to see people connect to the land and people of Israel, preparing them to come back to the U.S. and be a spokesperson for Israel. She said that as a result of her work, she sees lives changed over and over. Please join me in welcoming Tani Zarelli.
Well, can everybody hear me okay? Does it sound? Sometimes I know my voice will drop way down and people go, huh? I want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to come and have a wonderful lunch. I want to thank you for this organization. As a Republican, I'm always impressed when I see a group of people come together to share our values as Republicans and to talk about the issues that we face. But I'm also more grateful that this issue that I'm going to talk about really isn't a Republican issue. This crosses all the political party lines, it crosses all cultural lines, it crosses all religious lines and non-religious lines. Israel is a place in the Middle East that has become a second home to me. As the introduction said, I have spent now quite a bit of time. I actually was asked over the last 6 months, well, how much time, if you took all the time you've been over here in the last 5 years, how much time would you say you've actually been in Israel if it was culminated into one? And I realized that I would have been living in Israel 2.5, 3 years out of 5 years. So a lot of time has been spent there, and personally, I know my life has been changed dramatically. One of my guests today, Deborah, she's a very dear friend of mine, and she's been on this journey with me. She traveled also to Israel one time, many, many years ago, with another organization before I was ever brought into this. And then Deborah has spent been with me on a couple of times, an organized trip, and then on just a private time with just a few people. And she has seen the difference of what it means when you go off the tourist path and you connect to the land and you connect to the people, because you really learn about Israel. So what I want to talk to you guys about today, we have about 30 minutes, and I know that there's going to be questions, tons of questions, because we're having great dialogue just at our table. You're going to have tons of questions, and I want to open the last few minutes up for those, to answer those questions, or at least try to answer them. And I, of course, will stick around at the end so you can talk to me personally. And by the end of this, I'm hoping that maybe a few of you will want to come on a trip to Israel with me and actually see what I see, and see what Deborah sees, and see what countless people, hundreds of people, have seen over the last few years. So where did this all begin for me? My story begins as an American woman waking up at 5:30 West Coast time. Yeah, 5:30 in the morning West Coast time, and my husband turned on the TV, and I saw a plane go into the Twin Towers. And I thought, oh my gosh, what happened? And my husband and I sat there, and I remember there's just this It just like it just did, all the blood just rushed out of me. Because I can go back to that moment in time in a split second. I remember it touched the very core of me. And as a woman of faith, I sat in my bed trying to grasp what was happening, and I was hearing the news as it was coming in, reports coming in, and I just started to pray. It was the only thing I knew to do. And I heard that there was another plane coming, and that plane was heading, what they believed, was toward the White House. And I remember thinking, oh my God, what do we do? And I started to pray, and I can go back and I can see myself sitting in that bed, and I just started crying out. I said, oh God, please, please, if you can't stop this plane, if that's not your will you please rise up the men on that plane to take it down? Do not let this attack our nation and take out the seat of authority in our nation. I said, oh God, let the people call home. Let them say goodbye. And if somebody doesn't know you on that plane, may it be really real to them. Let them know that you are there. You're in the midst of this thing. You know, it wasn't until time later, I don't even know how much time later, that I heard the report of 3 men, 3 courageous, brave men who got up and they wrestled that plane, those terrorists. And that plane did have to go down. And lives were lost. All of them. But they were able to make their calls home, and we heard those reports. That story, though, rested inside of me, and it touched me even more because my daughter and my daughters and my husband had been to Ground Zero, which wasn't Ground Zero. They were at the trade centers exactly 1 month prior to that date. So that date will always rest inside of me. That it had been 1 month later, I could have lost my family. Millions of people lost, thousands and thousands of people lost their families due to that attack. In the political realm, we've heard that it's our own nation's fault, that it was a conspiracy. And there are people of faith that actually believe that lie. But I knew inside of me that that day our world had changed. I just didn't realize how much, and I didn't realize how. And it wasn't until 2006 I went to a conference on American and Israeli relations, and I was sitting in Savannah, Georgia, with a room of dignitaries from Israel. They were lawmakers, they were media specialists, they were brigadier generals, people who had fought in the wars of Israel, Yom Kippur, the 6-Day War, and they were telling us the truth of what was behind those wars. The media specialist for Ariel Sharon was explaining to us how the media works, and being against Israel, how the Hamas will come up to the border and they'll try to incite Israel to have to respond, and Israel will finally respond because they have to protect the people, and then the press releases go out by Hamas into CNN and everybody saying, Israel's attacked us. We're supposed to have a treaty here. They've attacked us. No, Israel was protecting themselves. They had to. But I understood what he said because of my political background. Being deep in politics, I know how the enemy twists things to make their point and to make a strong person look bad. And sadly, we both do it on both sides of the party aisle. But I understood what he was saying. And so when I heard it, I knew what he was speaking was truth. And when I listened to my friend, Limor Livnat, she's now the Minister of Sports and Culture in Israel, but at that time she was just an MK. And she talked about the education system in Israel. She talked about the culture. She talked about the opera and the plays, and I'm sitting there thinking, wow, this is not what I've heard about Israel. I listened to another lawmaker who's a doctor, and he talked about fighting in the war, and as a political leader, making decisions about how to fight wars and terrorism in their nation during the suicide bombing, and at the same time being a doctor. And one day, he has a suicide bomber on his table. And he's a plastic surgeon. But when you're in the middle of a war, everybody takes part at the hospitals. And here's a young girl who was strapped. And now he's having to make some major repairs on her. And he said, you know, he said, if you don't think for 1 minute that it didn't make me think, you just killed some of my people. I could do something. But he said, I'm a doctor first. And I was a patient. And I needed to take care of her. And in that moment, I felt the heart of a Jewish Israeli man. And so the conference went on, and because of my political background and my husband's political background, we were in private meetings and receptions with all these dignitaries. And I got to listen to them and watch them, and I was just mesmerized. You know, I watched them as they would talk to each other in Hebrew, and then all of a sudden turn to us and go, oh, we're so sorry, because we don't speak a lick of Hebrew, and they'd say, oh, we're so sorry, this is what we were saying. And then they'd bounce back, and the conversations would bounce around. And all of a sudden I began to realize that, oh my gosh, there's so much that we don't understand because we don't even understand a language. How can you understand even some of the Bible if you don't understand the language? And if you don't understand the language, how can you understand the culture? And all these thoughts just started overwhelming me, while at the same time, all the scriptures that I'd read as an American Christian came alive, because I was sitting now with the life. I was sitting with the Hebrew people, and I was sitting in Savannah, Georgia. Well, I walked away from that conference and I said, you know what, if I don't know this, and if I don't know enough about Israel, and I've been in politics for several years in the political realm, and I've read my Bible over and over and over, and how many other people don't understand this? And I also came away understanding that the battle we were facing was not going to be a political battle, but it truly is a religious battle. And people needed to understand that. We need to understand what the faith is that's being driven that would bring our Twin Towers down and try to do several more things.